I recognized him by the way he walked, hunched over, dragging his feet, as if he carried the weight of his entire life on his back. I never imagined I would see the man who was once my husband like this again, rummaging through torn bags and crushed cans just to survive. I was walking out of the bank with a folder tucked under my arm when I saw him leaning over a dumpster, separating scraps with dirty hands and stashing the aluminum cans into an old sack. My heart stopped. The whole world seemed to shrink down to that corner of the street. There he was, malnourished, bird over ground, white hair matted, clothes covered in stains. And yet it was him, the man who had once shared my bed, my table, my dreams. I stood paralyzed on the sidewalk, unable to take a single step. I remembered the day he left home without a clear explanation, leaving only a brief cold letter. "It's for the best." That abandonment broke me on the inside for years. I went from rage to contempt, and from contempt to a sadness that never fully went away. And now, after so much time, life was showing him to me like this, reduced to a can collector, invisible to everyone passing him by. I felt ashamed of my own thoughts. A part of me wanted to cross the street so I wouldn't be seen, so I wouldn't mix my past with that misery. But something stronger than pride pushed me to get closer. I took a step, then another. My heels clicked against the pavement, and he raised his head by instinct. Our eyes met. For a second, he recognized me. Then I saw the shock of memory flash across his face. His hands trembled. He tried to move away, as if I were a ghost coming to collect an unpayable debt. "Is that you?" I asked with a thread of a voice that didn't sound like mine. He lowered his gaze, ashamed. "You shouldn't see me like this," he said. "Forget it. Go on your way. But before we continue, I want to extend a very special invitation to you. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This helps me see that you support me and enjoy my stories. And comment down below which city you are watching us from right now. Let's continue." I didn't go on my way. I stood there in front of him with my heart pounding out of my chest. I looked at him closely, the turned shoes, the fingers cracked from the cold, the eyes sunken from hunger. Nothing about this man resembled the one I knew, the respected engineer who wore crisp suits and spoke about construction projects with such passion. "Tell me, why are you living like this?" I demanded, no longer able to hide the trembling. "After everything that happened, I need to know." He pressed his lips together, looking around as if he feared someone might be listening. Then he shook his head slowly. "You should never have seen me again," he whispered. "I did everything so you wouldn't have to carry this." I stepped closer. I could smell the stale sweet, the streets, the poverty. "With what?" I asked. "With what did you do all this, Thaddeus?" That was when he looked up, and with eyes full of tears, he let out the sentence that split me in two. "It was to save you." I felt like I was running out of air. My legs went weak. I grabbed his arm so he wouldn't fall. "Save me from what?" I said, almost begging. That tried to stay on his feet, but his body no longer responded. He fainted in my arms, collapsing onto the dirty asphalt like an old tree that can no longer hold itself up. I screamed for help. A couple of passers-by approached. We called an ambulance. While we waited, I knelt beside him, holding his head against my lap, just like I used to do when we were young and he got sick. I never thought I would hold him like this again. Fragile, defeated. In the ambulance, the paramedic said he was dehydrated with severe anemia and signs of chronic malnutrition. I could barely process those words. All I could see was his pale face and that sentence. "It was to save you." At the hospital, they treated him in the emergency room. They informed me that he had been seen several times in the area, sleeping in makeshift shelters, refusing help with no one on him. When he woke up hours later, I was still there. "Leave," he said as soon as he opened his eyes. "My worry doesn't belong to you anymore. You never stopped belonging to me as part of my history," I replied, "and I am not leaving until you tell me the truth." He closed his eyes, seeming to debate internally. Finally, with a broken voice, he murmured, "I didn't go broke because of bad decisions. I went broke because I obeyed." "Obey who?" I asked. He didn't answer. He turned his head toward the wall. His silence was harder than any confession. That night, I slept sitting next to his gurney, still not understanding the magnitude of what I was about to discover. I thought about our marriage, the unexplained arguments, his sudden flight, the legal papers that arrived afterward like a dry blow, the ruin that I also lived through when he left me alone with debts I never understood. At dawn, when he opened his eyes again, he looked at me with deep sadness. "Everything I lost so that you would stay alive," he said, "and even so, you hated me." I felt a terrible knot in my throat. "I didn't know anything," I replied. "I thought you had betrayed me." A tear slid down his dirty cheek. "That was what I needed you to believe." In that instant, I knew I had lived deceived for years, that my resentment had been built on a carefully designed line, and I understood that the misery he was living in wasn't the result of chance, but of a hidden sacrifice. I didn't yet know who was behind it all. I didn't know what real danger had stalked me back then, but something inside me ignited with force the need to get to the bottom of that truth. I slowly caressed his hand. "Rest," I told him. "This time you are not alone." As I watched him close his eyes again under the harsh white hospital light, I understood that this reunion among trash and cans hadn't been a coincidence. It had been the beginning of a truth capable of destroying many lives and changing mine forever. That slept almost all the next day, sedated by painkillers and exhausted by years of neglect. I stayed by his side without knowing exactly why, only with the certainty that if I left, something important would be lost in the shadows again. As I watched him breathe with difficulty, memories began to parade through my mind without permission, like a river breaking old levees. I met him when I was 28. He was a man full of plans, big words, strong hands. He worked day and night, and yet always found time to look at me as if I were his greatest achievement. He promised me a stable future, a house of our own, trips, peace of mind, and for many years he delivered. We weren't rich, but we were happy in our own way. I sewed, managed the house, made every dollar stretch. He built, he fixed, he dreamed. Our marriage wasn't perfect. We had arguments, long silences, small wounds that never quite finished healing, but I never imagined the end would come as it did. Cold, without shouting, without explanations, without a single word that would allow me to understand it. One morning, he simply didn't come back from work. 2 days passed without news. I went to the precinct, the hospitals, his office. Nobody knew anything. On the third day, a lawyer appeared at my house with a sealed envelope. Inside was a brief letter written in his handwriting. "Forgive me. It's for the best. Don't try to look for me anymore." That was the day my world started to break on the inside. For weeks, I called him relentlessly. I wrote to him. His number ceased to exist. Nobody answered me, and little by little, the final blows arrived. Debts I didn't know about, empty accounts, foreclosed properties. The legal papers appeared one after another like poisonous rain. In less than 6 months, I had lost everything: my husband, my stability, my home. I was forced to move into a small room and start over at 47 years old. Many looked at me with pity, others with suspicion. Some even blamed me for his abandonment. "You must have done something," they said. I let them talk because I didn't even understand myself. For years, I hated him. I hated him for leaving without explanations, for leaving me alone with the shame, with the creditors, with the memories. I hated him for not fighting, for not showing his face, for disappearing as if our life together had been a mistake that needed to be erased. That night, sitting next to his hospital bed, that hate began to crack for the first time. When he woke up again, I asked the nurses to leave us alone. I closed the door carefully. Thaddeus looked at me with exhaustion. His eyes were no longer the ones from before. They were broken by something deeper than poverty. "Tell me everything," I told him bluntly. "Don't lie to me anymore. It makes no sense now." He kept silent for a long time. His breathing was heavy. Finally, he spoke. "The day I disappeared, that same day, I was supposed to die. I felt like my chest was exploding." "How can you say that?" I whispered. Because that was what I was ordered to do, he replied. And I chose something else. I looked at him without understanding. Who gave you that order? He swallowed hard. Dangerous people. Very, very dangerous people. Everything in his face was truth. Not the truth that screams, but the kind that weighs heavy. I was accused of fraud I didn't commit, he continued. A project where I only signed documents they forced me to sign. When I wanted to report it, they showed me false evidence, bought witnesses, and a photograph of you coming out of our building. I felt a chill. They told me that if I spoke, if I tried to clear my name, you would pay the price. The words went through me like knives. And that's why you ran? I asked with a thin voice. I didn't run, he replied bitterly. I erased myself. He told me then that he accepted taking the blame for a guilt that wasn't his. He signed agreements, handed over assets, let our accounts be emptied so the story would seem credible, so no one would doubt his fall, so those men wouldn't look at me again. You had to hate me, he said. It was the only way you wouldn't suspect anything. I cried in silence, squeezing my hands together so I wouldn't break into pieces. All these years, everything I suffered was to protect me, I asked. To save your life, he replied. I covered my mouth with my hand. I felt 40 years of resentment crumbling all at once, leaving only a painful void. And why didn't you ever come back? I whispered. Because they kept watching, he said. Every time I tried to get close, someone reminded me that you were still alive only because I was complying. I understood then his misery, not as a consequence, but as an imposed condition. That night, I didn't sleep. I walked through the hospital corridors aimlessly, my mind full of new images, rewriting my entire history, my hate, my abandonment, my ruin. It had all been part of the same operation of control. The next morning, I returned to his bed with a different determination. You know, I can't unhear this now, I told him. I'm not the scared woman I was before. He looked at me with worry. Don't dig up the past, he begged. The past kills. Silence does too, I replied. And I've kept silent for too many years. He tried to sit up. If I talk, if you talk, they will come. Let them come, I said without trembling. This time you won't be alone. For the first time in a long time, I saw fear in his eyes. Not for him. For me. You don't know who you were messing with, he murmured. You didn't know how many years of life you were stealing from me with your silence either, I replied. He pressed his lips together, crying without making a sound. That same day, strange people began to appear at the hospital, men who didn't look like anyone's family. They asked about beds that didn't exist. They watched from afar. Thaddeus grabbed my hand in desperation. They've already started, he whispered. I looked at him with the calm of someone who has already lost too much to back down. Then the end of this story has already started, too, because if he had become a choice to save me, I was now willing to become the woman who would bring him back to life and make those who had destroyed him pay. The shadows of the hospital no longer seemed peaceful to me. Every hallway was an unanswered question, every unknown face a possible threat. Since Thaddeus's confession, my world had changed irrevocably. I was no longer just the woman who had reunited with her ex-husband in misery. Now I was a piece in a story of fear, of invisible men, of silences bought with ruin. That night, while he slept, I went back to the waiting room with my head burning. I thought about everything I had lived through after his disappearance, the debts that drowned me, the shame of asking for help, the looks from those who believed I had been abandoned through my own fault. Every memory now acquired a new dark shade. It had all been a stage play to protect me, and I had been the only one who didn't know. At dawn, I went back to his room. Thaddeus woke up with difficulty. I brought him some water. He looked at me as if he feared I wasn't there anymore, as if he thought his truth had scared me away. I am still here, I told him. He nodded with relief. We remained in silence for a few seconds until I was the one who broke the ice. I want the names, I said. It's not enough to understand the past anymore. I need to know who destroyed you. He closed his eyes. His hand gripped the sheet tightly. Not all names are said out loud, he replied. Some are pronounced only once and then cost you your life. Mine was already in danger without me knowing it, I answered. You won't have to carry this alone again. He took a deep breath. It all started with a big project, he said, a multi-million-dollar public works contract. I was just the technical lead, nothing more, but the contracts were full of traps, host companies, inflated invoices, diversion of funds. When I discovered it, I thought I should report it. His voice broke. That same night, I received the first threat. He explained that at first he thought he could get out of it by paying, resigning, disappearing, but they never wanted just his silence. They wanted a culprit. They wanted a clean name to pin everything on, and he, with his position and his spotless record, was perfect. When they realized I wouldn't cave, he continued, they brought you to the table. I felt my stomach close up. They showed me photographs of you entering and leaving our building, he said. Schedules, routes, places where you were alone. They told me everything could turn into an accident. I brought my hand to my chest. I remembered several days when I felt someone following me for no reason. I never imagined it was real. That was when I accepted, he whispered. I signed everything. I handed over everything. I left without saying goodbye. You had to hate me so you wouldn't try to find me, so they would know the blackmail worked on me. I cried in silence. And everything they took from us? I asked. The accounts, the house, it was part of the price, he replied. It had to look like I had lost everything due to my own mistakes. And you really lost it, I said bitterly. Yes, he nodded. Because when the monster sees it can take, it's never satisfied. He wanted to say something else, but a coughing fit forced him to stop. I called the nurse. While she attended to him, I saw out of the corner of my eye a man watching the hallway from the back, too attentive to be a worried relative. When our eyes met, he turned his face immediately and walked away. The fear returned like a cold wave. That same afternoon, a doctor came to speak with me in private. He explained that Thaddeus needed more tests, that his condition was serious but stable. Before leaving, he lowered his voice. Be careful with the visitors, he warned me. Today, 3 people asked for him who don't seem to be from his circle. I felt my knees go weak. I returned to his room with a decision already formed in my chest. I can't keep listening to you halfway, I told him. If you were going to talk, talk now. We don't know how much time we have. He looked at me with pain. There is something I never told you, he said. That night, before disappearing, I left a box buried under the old workshop where I used to work. Nobody else knows about it. Inside are the originals of the documents that prove all the embezzlement. My heart jumped. Why didn't you use them? Because then you would have died, he replied. But now that they know I've surfaced, maybe it makes no sense to keep quiet anymore. We looked at each other for a long time. I understood that his silence hadn't only protected me, it had also protected many others who lived unaware of that network of corruption. I want to go for that box, I told him. No, he replied sharply. It's dangerous. It's more dangerous to sit still waiting, I answered. You already sacrificed your life for me once. I won't let you do it again. He kept silent. Finally, he nodded with resignation. In the back of the shop, behind a false shelf, he said, everything is there. That night, I barely slept. Every shadow in the hallway seemed like a threat, every sound a warning. The next morning, I left the hospital with my heart in a fist. I took a taxi and headed to the old workshop on the south side, now converted into an almost abandoned warehouse. The place smelled of old oil and dust. I walked with slow steps, holding my breath. I found the shelf, moved boxes, touched the wall until I found an irregular gap. I dug with a rusty tool that was there. My hands were shaking when I touched the buried metal box. I pulled it out with effort. It was heavy. I opened it with the key Thaddeus had described to me with words. Inside were sealed folders, thumb drives, contracts with real signatures, photos, recordings, enough evidence to take down more than one powerful name. I felt a mixture of terror and determination. It wasn't enough to know the truth. Now I held it in my hands. Leaving the workshop, I saw a car parked half a block away that started its engine immediately. I walked without looking back to a corner full of people and went into a store. I waited, watched. The car circled and finally disappeared. The game was no longer secret. I returned to the hospital with the box inside a regular shopping bag. Thaddeus was waiting for me awake. When he saw my gaze, he understood I had done it. I didn't say anything, just nodded. Now they're not just chasing you and me, he said with sadness. Now they were chasing the truth. Let them try, I replied. This time I don't plan to hide it. In that instant, I knew I had crossed an invisible border. I was no longer just the woman who cried, finding her ex-husband collecting cans. Now, I was the guardian of a truth capable of destroying empires, and those who had played with our lives for years were no longer the only ones who knew their secrets. I returned to the hospital with the metal box pressed against my chest, as if I were carrying someone alive inside. Every step weighed on me, not just from the fear of being followed, but from everything that box represented. Decades of lies, injustice, a life destroyed without me ever understanding why. When I entered the Diaz's room again, he looked at me the way one looks at someone returning from a war. I found it, I said barely, placing the bag under the bed. His eyes filled with tears. He closed his eyelids for a few seconds, as if praising God in silence. Then, there is no turning back. There never was, I replied. I sat next to the gurney. For hours, we didn't open the box. We stayed in silence, listening to the sounds of the hospital, as if we needed to gather strength to face what was coming. Finally, with trembling hands, I opened it. Inside were folders labeled by years, dates, stamps, names I didn't know, but Thaddeus did. Photographs of construction sites, maps, payment lists, and also my own accounts, my properties, my forged signatures. I saw documents where I appeared as a debtor of impossible sums, contracts where my name was linked to shell companies I had never heard of. Everything was made so that if one day they investigated me, it would look like I was the guilty one. I felt a dissonance so strong I had to close my eyes. All this fell on me after you left, I whispered. The debts, the seizures. I thought it was bad luck because of your abandonment. It wasn't abandonment, he said with a broken voice. It was a sacrifice, and even so, it wasn't enough to protect you completely. The images began to unleash buried memories. The day I was evicted from the house without them looking me in the eye, the court notice that left me without savings, the humiliation of borrowing money from relatives who used to admire me, the sleepless nights wondering how to pay a debt I hadn't contracted, the years I became a burden to everyone. I cleaned houses, I said with my throat burning. In my 50s, I went hungry. I slept on borrowed sofas, and meanwhile, they were using my name to launder money. I squeezed a document between my fingers. Why didn't you warn me, Thaddeus? I asked, crying. Even if they had killed me, at least I would have died knowing the truth. No, he responded with desperation, because I still had one chip to negotiate for your life. You didn't know, but every time someone doubted my silence, I showed a photo of you as a reminder of why I was still obeying. My tears fell onto the papers. So my misery was also part of that theater, I said. Yes, he nodded. So it would look like you and I were totally destroyed, so no one would look further. For days I went back mentally to each of the losses I had lived. Nothing had been chance. Nothing had been bad luck. I had been carefully pushed to the edge of the abyss so the weight of guilt would fall on a man, and in passing on his wife dragged down by ruin. I walked out of the room stumbling. I sat alone on a bench in the hallway. I looked at my aged hands stained by life, by the hard work I never understood why I had to do. Now the answer was there. Someone had decided I had to fall to save a ring of criminals. That night, I couldn't go back to sleep. I opened the box alone in a small room where no one entered. I read the documents one by one. I followed the dates. I discovered names I had heard on the news, surnames linked to big corporations, to politicians, to respectable men. I, without knowing it, had been used as a screen for a gigantic corruption network. And they hadn't just stolen Thaddeus's life, they had stolen mine, too. At dawn I went back to his room. I know everything I lost, I told him. Now I want to know who took it from me. He pressed his lips together. If we go to the end, there will be no forgiveness, he said, only judicial blood. Many will fall. I don't want blind revenge, I replied. I want justice with names and surnames. He looked at me with a mix of pride and fear. That justice kills slowly. I died slowly for years, too, I said without trembling. Now it's their turn to fall without masks. From that day on, I stopped being just a woman wounded by the past. I began to secretly call the same people who had previously closed doors on me, banks, courts, old partners. I used the documents in the box as a key, where before they denied me entry, now they listened in silence. I saw how the gears began to move. Some told me it was impossible, others that it was too late, a few that it was dangerous. I know, I always replied. But danger chased me all my life without men choosing it. Now I choose it. That got worse during those days. His body could no longer resist the burden of so many years of neglect. I watched him sleep and thought that perhaps he wouldn't live to see the end of it all, and that idea squeezed my soul. One afternoon, with a weak voice, he took my hand. If I don't get to see them fall, he whispered, promise me you won't stop. I promise, I replied with tears. This time, no one will silence us again. But outside the hospital, new faces began to appear, men in suits, dark sedans, voiceless calls, veiled warnings. I knew the pieces on the other side of the board were moving too, but I wasn't alone anymore. I wasn't the deceived woman from the past. Now I was the woman who had discovered why her life had been stolen. And when a woman understands why she fell, she becomes much more dangerous than before she fell, because she no longer fights just to survive. She fights to recover every year they took from her, and I had just begun. The hospital room was in semi-darkness when I returned after another day of calls, appointments, and uncomfortable silences that slept restlessly. His chest rose and fell with difficulty, as if every breath dragged an invisible weight. I sat next to him with the metal box still resonating in my memory. Outside, the night seemed too quiet for everything that was about to explode. When he opened his eyes, he looked at me with a mix of gratitude and guilt. They've started moving, haven't they? He whispered. Yes, I replied. They know someone has the documents. He closed his eyes warily. Then there is no easy way out of this. There never was, I told him. But now, for the first time, it's not just you against them. We kept silent for a few seconds. Then I leaned a little toward him. There is something else you haven't told me, Thaddeus. I know. I see it in your look, and I need it all now. His face hardened. For the first time since I had reunited with him, I saw true terror in his eyes. That is the only thing I should never have told you, he murmured. Because when you know, there will be no turning back for you. There is no turning back for me since I saw you collecting cans. I replied, speak. He took long seconds to do it. Finally, with a broken voice, he let out the sentence that froze me to the bone. If I talk, if I say the full names, they kill you. I felt a sharp blow to the stomach. Just like that, I whispered. Just like that, he confirmed. They aren't just corrupt businessmen. There are people from the state, officials, bought judges, people who make files disappear, and people. A shiver ran down my spine. I understood that this was bigger than I had imagined. It wasn't just about money. It was about raw power. That's why I agreed to fall, he continued. Because when they put your photo on the table and said everything could look like a mudging and accident, I knew I wasn't negotiating my life. I was negotiating yours. My eyes filled with tears. And I hated you for years, I said. I buried you alive in my heart. That was what kept me alive, he replied, knowing that as long as you hated me, you were safe. I covered my face with my hands. The past was being rewritten with blows inside me. Every memory of rage was now transforming into a twisted, painful, extreme act of love. Tell me the names, I insisted. even if they kill me tomorrow. He shook his head. First, we have to secure the evidence. It's not enough to have the box. They can erase traces, manufacture fires, assaults, accidents. We need the truth to come out in a way they can't cover up in. How? With the press, with clean prosecutors, with international witnesses if necessary. I took a deep breath. I understood that this was no longer just a family tragedy. It was a war against a rotten structure. Then tell me about them, I said. Even without names yet. Thaddeus closed his eyes and began to recount in fragments a consortium of companies, rigged bids, diversions of millions, projects that were never finished, officials who signed in exchange for envelopes, lawyers in charge of silencing whoever rebelled. He told me about an accountant who appeared suicided, about an engineer who fled after a false accusation, about a councilman who died in a supposed home accident. They all knew too much, he whispered. Like me, I, without knowing it, had been the bargaining chip. That night, I left the hospital with a knot in my chest. I walked down the sidewalk looking at every stranger as a possible enemy. For the first time, I felt real fear, physical, not just emotional. Even so, I didn't stop. The next day, with the help of an old journalist who had investigated big cases years ago, I began to pull strings with extreme care. I showed him only a minimal part of the documents, enough for him to know this was real and huge. If this is true, he told me, more than one person is going to want your head. They wanted it before, I replied, only I didn't know it. That same afternoon, I received the first direct warning. A folded paper slipped under the door of my rental apartment. Leave the past where it is, or go with it. I trembled, but I didn't back down. I went back to the hospital that night. Thaddeus watched me as soon as I entered. They warned you, didn't they? I nodded. Yes, they've started. Then the clock is ticking, he said, and not in our favor. He took my hand with a strength that didn't seem to correspond to his weakened body. Listen to me well, he said. If this goes sideways, promise me you won't save me. Save yourself. No, I replied without hesitation. You already saved yourself once for me. Now we save ourselves together, or we fall together. His eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't name. That stubbornness was always your greatest virtue and your greatest danger. I smiled for the first time in days. In that moment, I understood something with brutal clarity. They had beat on my fear, on my silence, on my fragility. But I was no longer the woman who cleaned houses believing life had punished her without reason. Now I knew why they had destroyed me, and I knew exactly who I was.